Yeah.
That's like lazy, so they need to find ways to be more efficient.
I'm lazy, that's why I did it for myself. I'm just sharing what I did for myself. So.
Probably the free beer room.
Yeah. That's a good point. Most of it will be probably on the sketchboard, so maybe the lights will be better. Yeah, there's not a lot. And I can't get this to stay. Okay, this didn't go well for me but let's see. Apparently I cannot.
If you want them to be brighter, you have to push longer.
There we go. I think that's probably okay, right? Sorry. That's okay. So I'm a bit nervous about this one. The first person I explained it to on Monday evening was June, and her first comment was, "Oh, that could be a disaster." So, so let's see. It's going to get a strong reaction. Let's put it that way. Good or bad, I'm not sure. So, yeah, this is quite different. But okay, my name is Benjamin Hodge, or for people that are more familiar with Twitter, no worries, guys. Autonomous IT, and I work for a company called Kemp Technologies. So in this session, I want to do it a little bit more like a workshop style, which is why it could go really wrong, because there is almost nothing prepared, and the idea is that by the end of the session, we will have some code artifacts and things like that. So a big thing for me in the last probably 18 months has been the types of problems I'm trying to solve are more complex and larger, and I'm trying to solve it for other people. So working out how to build reusable solutions, but solutions that are easy to maintain has been a big thing I've been working on. And also, often I have a product management and development team, and often we're trying to quickly prototype ideas we have for improving our solutions and get them to take that up and productize it properly. And they are usually quite skeptical until they see a proof of concept. So you need to come up with some kind of model. So I've been doing a lot of study of object-oriented design and a lot of the work that the Agile programming community has already done over the last 20 years. So a lot of the problems we are starting to have now as maybe operations teams moving into a role of automating our code has already been solved by developers for a long time. And so we can learn a lot of things from them. The biggest thing, though, is that there's a big difference between 200 or 500 lines of PowerShell code and 1 million lines, software project. So I've been working on how do you scale some of this down, even to just as an individual person. So what I want to do is actually just quickly run through how I currently think and work, and also a lot of the content that June's talked about actually fits very nicely in her TDD talks and her help talks. So I'll mention where I think I will actually try to incorporate some of the ideas I've heard her talk about into this process for myself in the future. So I learned some good ideas there. And then I was originally just going to take something I wanted to build and show you how I go through the process, but I thought that was too boring. So I would like somebody to suggest a problem they are currently looking at or perhaps have to look at, and then we'll try to model that, which is where it could go really pear-shaped and wrong. But I would like us to try and see it in real time rather than a sort of canned example, because I think that is the real value here. This should be something that is less work, not more, and it's something you can come up with good solutions quite quickly. So I think for most people, this is their development process as much as it is. You hear about a problem or see a problem, you immediately start looking for existing commandlets or modules that sound like they do what you want. You try out some of the examples. If they listen to June, you have some nice help, but maybe not. You piece it together in a script. You then try to work out why your script doesn't do what you want it to do, and you just loop around until you get something that looks good, and you deploy. So definitely 18 months ago, this was what I did. You may or may not be using source control and all those other things, but from a planning perspective, essentially, there isn't much. You sort of learn as you go, right, through trying things out. One of the big things that I've changed is around a much more methodical process. So first of all, taking some of the ideas around Agile methods like Scrum or extreme programming and writing a short use case. This is just in English, 2 or 3 sentences, a paragraph. What is the problem, right? Or what is the use for this solution, right? To make sure it's clear about what you're trying to do. There is a visual standard called Unified Modeling Language, which you can use to do graphical models, and I'll show some examples of that. And if you came to my other talk, you saw my high techie scribbles in my book, which is how I sort of model things now, and I'll show you some more. Then I actually structure my script and write my script just using pseudocode. So again, just in plain English or in German or whatever language you're most comfortable with, document in pseudocode what my intent is, what should my logic do. And then finally, review that pseudocode to make sure it achieves the use case. So even though there are more steps in this process, the iterations that you do here are much less because you've spent a bit of time thinking about what you need to do, so this becomes very fast. Having your intent documented in pseudocode makes it really easy for peer review. So even if this implementation is quite complex, right, and maybe some of your peers aren't really as good as you, they can just read native language, and if this happens, do this. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it should be, if this doesn't happen, do this, and you've made a mistake in how you're thinking about things. It makes it much easier to do peer review. So basically, this part is intent. This is making sure your intent is clear and that you understand your own intent. And especially if you're making a solution for someone else, making sure you understand what they want you to make for them. And this part is implementation. At least for myself, but a lot of people I see, they focus on implementation. That's where they focus. And you can write a really awesome script that runs really fast and doesn't error and doesn't do what you wanted it to, right? Another thing is some of the worst things to debug are logic errors. Again, there are no errors. Everything is fine, but you're off by one, or you put an if instead of an if not, or something like that. So logic errors are really, really hard to find because there are no errors from a syntax perspective. It's just that you told the program to do the wrong thing. The other thing that I'm starting to try to adopt is the use of Pester before I code. And the biggest problem is not learning Pester. The syntax is fairly straightforward. You can learn it fairly quickly. The biggest thing is, what do you test? How do you write your tests to be useful without being a massive overhead? The reason I think most people struggle with this is because they don't understand their intent yet, right? But once you understand your intent, you test your intent. That's the whole point, right? The implementation details shouldn't matter to your Pester tests, right? You should be able to refactor, but your intent should not change. And to test well and to write good tests, you need to know what the input and output will be, and that needs to be stable. If you change that, there will be all these follow-on effects you need to go change in a lot of different areas, so it creates a lot of work. And I was just in June's talk about help. It's similar. She uses help to define her code specification, to define her intent. That's how she interprets it. So I think I will start doing that as well, rather than just do this modeling and go straight to code. Once you have the modeling, you can write your help, you can write your tests, and then you can start to implement. So sort of maybe next year here, there is another kind of box in between these two. But I think it's a good middle step without too much overhead. Okay. So I want to try and build a solution for something in 30 minutes or less. Here is the risky bit. Does anyone have a problem that we can model?
Yeah, I have one for you, I think.
Yeah?
So maybe you heard that in 3PSS I'm a consultant, so I go around a lot in different kind of networks. And it would be nice to have some kind of a script that I can check on which network I'm connected, and that will set the IP address for that network.
So, okay, so you are in a lot of customer environments, you're moving networks, you have a predefined IP address for each of those networks, and you want to, even though it's statically assigned to the NIC, you want to dynamically detect what environment you are and update your system configuration so that you are compliant. Okay, great, thank you, let's do that. It sounds not too hard, so. Whew. Think we can make some progress. Okay, so the first thing is the use case I talked about. And again, this, just like help, and again, I don't want to reference June's talk too much or she'll slap me for copyright or something, but she had a really good comment about how she writes her synopsis in help. This is the sort of story, and it maps very closely to what a use case is, right? You don't want to talk about, I'm going to use this commandlet, I'm going to use that commandlet. You want to talk about the problem you're trying to solve. Because at the end of the day, there is some real-world problem for a business or a person that you're trying to adapt to. So you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to take a stab at this, right? So basically, excellent. Riveting. Let's try again. Okay. When moving between different network environments, is a problem to configure correct settings without DHCP available. Like to detect network environment and configure the correct settings my system. Something like that, right?
In some networks, I'm able to be on a private network.
Mm-hmm.
Some networks I want to be on a public network. So that is my
Okay.
protected.
Okay. Settings that are included should not be limited to PIP, but also private, public security settings. Yeah? Perfect. See, if we didn't do this, I wouldn't have known that. Okay. So you straight away, this is just giving you, again, it's the story or the definition or the sort of real world intent. What is it we're really trying to do, right? So the next thing that I normally do is try and work out all of the systems or people involved, right? In this case, it's sort of for an individual, so we don't have to coordinate with other people. But there are different, in UML, they call it actors. So systems can also be actors, right? So in this case, we want everything to be automated. So the sort of triggering event for this to happen isn't going to be, I walk into a room or anything like that. It's going to be a change of network, right? And then there'll be different components. So just thinking a little bit about some of the subcomponents that might be involved or some of the people. So in this case, it's mostly going to be the network interface, right? We want to detect if it's plugged in, gets a link or on a new connection. I don't know, what else might be involved or sources of information or systems we need to in this problem? Anything else?
I can make it a bit more easier.
Mm-hmm.
On all these networks is DHCP IP address you are getting, so you can use that as a starting point.
Okay, so you will receive settings via DHCP, but they will not be the settings that you need. So you could use that information to detect which environment you're in, but then you need to statically set a predefined, okay? So it's not without a DHCP.
You have it in the end in the first line.
Yeah, need wrap. Okay, it's not the best format. I wouldn't normally do it like this, but I want it to be easy to see, and I'm a really bad handwriter, so. Okay. Settings. A DHCP is available, but require a statically defined setting. And if anyone says you can just solve this with DHCP reservations, I'm going to just kick you out, so don't try that one, right? We're just going to take it as is.
What settings are we actually talking about?
So you want to configure your interface, so IP address, subnet mask, DNS, plus the public-private settings, right?
Maybe proxy server,
Yeah, do you need...
firewall settings.
Yeah, it can be maybe also in proxy setting.
Okay.
Is the IP address we want to have in the end in the scope of the DHCP server? So
Yeah.
whether we are in scope or out of scope.
So when we apply the IP address, is it an arbitrary static IP address, or will you have a list that in this customer environment, I have this one IP all the time?
That is the case.
Okay, so it's a static list. So we're going to have some kind of static list of environment settings. Okay, and what else do we have? The private, public network settings. Yeah? Anyone think of anything we missed?
There can be two network interfaces connected. One is LAN, one is the Wi-Fi. So we need to distinguish whether we connected Wi-Fi or LAN and then set up the correct adapter.
Yeah, so let's say, well, let's just, instead of network interface, let's say all system network interfaces need to be included in scope, right?
And I don't want to run the script manually. It has to be triggered by something.
Yeah, so the way I see this being triggered, it's okay, but you can understand already, right? If I had said, oh, no problem, thanks, I will go to the speaker's lounge, I'll come back in 20 minutes, after his first statement, right? How much more work is coming out when you think about it? So often you say, oh, sure, no problem, I'll do it for you. Here you go. But. Okay, I'll do it for you. But. And a week later, you are still building this tool for this person, right? At least if you know it will take a week, you say, great, no problem, I can do it for you, but I don't have a week right now. I have a day, a week for the next 4 weeks. I'll come back in a month, right? So this is what I mean about understanding your intent and really what it is you are committing to building, even just for yourself, right? Because we could have been 3 or 4 commandlets into how to modify interface settings, what is the syntax for this parameter, on and on and on. And in the meantime, you would still not have what he needs, right? So that's fine. So yes, the way I think this should be triggered is when an interface is connected to a network. So then that should be the triggering event that pulls this up and sees, is this network one of this list of networks and environments I have? And if so, do this, right? It would not be a manual. Sorry?
All the domains, the network areas are domain networks. So will you have the domain name in the network space? That we talk about in searching.
You mean like the DNS search domain?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, yep. DNS settings. That was, I think we talked about it, but I missed it. Okay? All right. Don't say anything else for a bit. Okay. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so the next thing that I usually try to do is, now we sort of know some of the systems involved, and we want to start to understand yeah, is this a function? Is it lots of functions? Is it a module? Is it a few modules? How big is this? How does everything interact? Do we need to have some things running on my system and some things running on another system, right? How do all these pieces work together? So what I usually do for that is I like to use sketches, right? So UML is the Unified Modeling Language. It is a standard. There's a whole committee in charge of defining it. It has a whole schema behind it, so multiple tools can consume it and modify it and all this kind of stuff. But no one really uses it to that extent. You can, for example, even create UML models that can auto-generate code just from the model. You don't have to type anything, right? You can use it for an architecture blueprint, or you can use it as just a sketch. So I really just use it for sketches, right? They are not 100% accurate. Someone who is really anal about the UML standard will probably scream at me because I don't follow all of them, but it's just a way to encode your sort of understanding and coordinate your understanding, and it also is a good way to share what your thinking is amongst a team, right? So you don't get caught up in syntax and other things like that. So there are a couple of standard diagram types. There's quite a few, but there's a couple that come up a lot and I think are the most useful. The first is an activity diagram. And again, this isn't probably a good example of a very traditional activity diagram, but the idea of an activity diagram is you have actors, right? Again, it could be a person, it could be a system, and you're going through a particular use case. So in this case, you are the actor, you bring in your laptop, you connect to a network. Is this one of my clients' networks? Yes or no? If it is, configure the correct settings, right? That's the type of thing we want to model. You can also have class diagrams. Classes in other languages are much more common, especially in object-oriented, but you can use very similar structures to map things like modules and functions and packages and things like that. So you can start to get an idea how your code should be structured, right? And Jan had a great talk in the German breakout where he has a tool that helps you implement this kind of code structure automatically or programmatically through the ISE. So you get a nice and easy to maintain and understand package. And finally is a sequence diagram. So this takes a specific scenario and all the systems and shows the communication and interaction between them. And in a way that this is time 0 and this is time going down. So it shows you how you need to send and receive information maybe between functions, maybe between physical systems. So you can understand all the little pieces in communication and data that will pass back and forth, right? So let's just quickly begin at the beginning, right? This one should be fairly simple for our use case. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Richard.
Richard. Thank you, Richard. Okay, here is Richard. My wonderful artistic skills. Okay, and Richard has his laptop. It's all very nice. Okay, and then there's either a network cable or Wi-Fi, right? Richard's going to connect to a network, right? Some kind of network connection. Okay, we have our DHCP server, right? We have our DNS server. They may or may not be the same systems. What else did we say? Let me bring up. I think most of the other things are subsystems, right?
We have this list of
Here we go.
networks.
Okay. Yeah, so these are sort of external things, and if we, inside his laptop, right, we have a whole bunch of subsystems that are involved, right? So we'll have the WLAN interface, the Ethernet interface, right? We have some kind of data store, right, of our networks. Okay. Probably have some firewall settings. I think that's probably about it, right? Most of it will fall under the interfaces. So we kind of have all these systems here, right? These are all the things that will sort of be involved, right? In this case, to be honest, that kind of diagram in this particular case, especially because we are all computer engineers and so forth, it probably doesn't tell us anything we don't know, right? But I'm just using it as an example. So here we're just sort of trying to make sure we visually understand, right, the use case. We're just sort of taking what we've got there in text and mapping out how this kind of fits together, right? I think the next two diagram types would be the most useful in this kind of scenario to get us a better understanding of what this might look like, right? So I think something like a sequence diagram first would be good to understand, okay, what is all the events that are going to trigger and take place in this scenario, right, in this use case. And then from there, we can map our class diagram and okay, somebody come and just hold this here for like half an hour. No, it's okay. All right. Okay. So we're going to start with some kind of event, right, which I think anytime that one of your interfaces connects to a network, that's when we want this to trigger, right? So the starting event will be network connection is detected. Man, look at this guy. He's so... Oh, bam. Beautiful. Okay. And then it can be a little bit difficult to get this right the first time. So obviously, if this talks to that, and then that talks to this, and then these talk in the middle, it can get a bit messy. So I usually find you sketch this the first time, you get it wrong. I use a whiteboard a lot, so you can just rub it out. Right? It might take a couple of times to get it right, just so that it is neatly laid out. But to be honest, you can't really get it too wrong, right? You have a nice way to pass things even right along the side. So we're going to have an interface, right? We're going to have, what else? We're going to have our DHCP. And then we're going to have our firewall settings. And we're going to have our data store, right? Okay. So the first thing that's going to happen is the interface is going to be connected, right? And probably we've missed something out here already.
Which one?
Right? Well, we want to know if a network connection happens. Now, unless he wants to run this script in the background all the time, it might be nicer to have like a WMI event or something like that that can trigger an action, right, to call the script. Otherwise, it's just going to have to be running infinitely all the time. But, right? So already you can start to see, maybe I missed something, right? Maybe there's something I haven't thought of. But let's just pretend that we have this script running all the time. We detect that this has happened, right? So the interface and the DHCP, you said you're going to get a DHCP, right? Okay, so this is all interacting, right? You're going to get some kind of interaction with your DHCP server, right? And then this is going to get an IP address, right? And network settings. Okay. right? And then all of these other things will get configured there. So what we want some way of doing is, once this is configured, again, we probably need our script, right, that's running. So once this occurs, right, we want our script to be able to pick up those settings and compare it against the data store, right? So this is just running all the time, right? We're just going to pretend that's always in the background, right? This is going to happen. So we basically now have another event. Once that's set, right, our script is going to go and read those settings from the interface and get back, hey, where am I, right? So we're going to get back the network settings. Okay, so I think the next thing we're going to compare it to our data store, right? Basically, is this one of the subnets or areas that it's defined, right? And we're going to get back some kind of data, right? So here we're going to, maybe this is import customer networks, right? Then we're going to test it, right? So we're going to do some kind of call to probably another function, right? That just tests, did the settings get here match something on this list, right? So test current net. You can see why I don't write by hand or on the screen also. Okay, and then if this is true, right, we're going to change these settings, right? Or set customer settings. Okay, that's probably about it, right? And then set the firewall, right? Set firewall. Can anyone see something wrong with this already?
It doesn't take in unknown scenarios. Like maybe there's port filtering active or something, which doesn't you allow to make that initial network connection.
Sorry? You mean when this connection is made, you can't get something from the DHCP?
Yeah, and then the event is not triggered.
That's correct, but okay, yes, that's a sort of niche case, but there's a much bigger case. You would then need to then have either multiple events or some way of then doing a TCP dump and using ARPs to find out where you are, and that's too complicated for 30 minutes. So. Okay, we are statically defining these settings. This will work just perfectly the first time, right? Then when you go to the second area, we haven't cleaned anything up, right? So when we disconnect, we need to reset to DHCP, right? So disconnect, right? Needs to trigger this, and then this needs to go and reset to DHCP. And already there's a lot of screaming probably solved just there, right? Okay, so we have some idea of some of the information we're going to pass back and forth, right? Some of the systems that will be involved. Here we even have maybe a few function names, right? We're going to have some way of importing our data, right? Testing, whether the current settings match that, right? And we need to work out what data we need in there, right? We need a function to set the interface settings, one to set the firewall settings, and one to reset, right? So probably this can be contained in one module, right? Maybe we move some helper functions out later, right? Does this look like what's in your head? Yeah? Good. Whew. So far, this is going all right. Okay. So the next thing is, let's actually work out what our code might look like, right? Oh, don't rip it that far down. Okay. It's okay. We don't need it now. We know what it says. Okay. All right. So we need, again, let's just assume that this is just running all the time, right? We're not going to have events that start up the script. Let's just assume the script is always running. So we're going to have some kind of start or controller function, right? Function. We're going to have a detect interface connected, or connected, detect interface disconnected, import customer networks, right, test network, I don't know, is customer, I don't know, that's not a very good name, and what was it? Start, detect.
Reset.
Yes. Yep. Reset. Network settings. That's going to stomp on a namespace somewhere. We'll work that out. Set. Customer. Settings. Set customer firewall. Firewall. I threw it away too early. No, it looks okay. Okay. Right, so again, there's our functions, right? Now, what I normally do is try to go through and again, think through for each of these, what parameters do they need, right? What is the object type of each parameter, right? So here we're starting to define our input interface, right? This is the part that if we want to change it later, it's going to be a lot of work because functions will call functions will call functions, and if you change what's going in, you have to go change all the things that use that thing, right? So you want to understand how they're all linked together. So these arrows are dependencies, right? My module here, if you came to my other talk, this is just a DSC wrapper for an existing module, right? So this DSC wrapper is dependent on this module. If this module changes its syntax, I'm going to have to update this. The virtual service uses parameters to call the load balancer class. So if I change what needs to be called for the load balancer, I need to change the virtual service. So you can quickly get these dependencies that make things really complicated, and you want to know, if I change this, how much work is it going to be? And you want to make sure these things don't change. Your script blocks can change, but what you put in and what you get out is very costly to change. So what I would normally do is map through each of these now and work out just a skeleton function, which is, all it is the function name, the parameters, and the output type, right? So let's just pick one, right? We won't get through all of them. But let's pick one. Which one looks interesting? Anybody? Don't care? No?
I think detect.
Here, detect if the interface is connected. Okay? Okay. So this is where June would go write her help. which I think is awesome, and where you would then write your pester tests, which again is awesome, but yeah, I haven't got there yet either, so don't worry. I still aren't doing all of that before. Okay, so we're going to do detect. Anybody wants to check approved verbs, just shout out.
You say that you already done a lot of help, not the help for the user, but then for any other engineer working on your software,
Yes.
you already have lots of help.
Yeah.
That's what usually when people say, oh, where's the documentation? They just need to do this process over again, reverse engineer what you've done, because they.
Yeah. So what I've started doing, I'll show you a couple of tools. So all these sort of funny squiggly men and stuff, I just take a photo with my phone. I have a piece of software that digitizes whiteboard or sketches. So it sort of extracts it out and gets the contrast right and everything like that. And then I have another one where you can dynamically modify it. So for example, if I have an arrow pointing here and I realize it should point here, I can just move it. I can embed hyperlinks, images, and rich text. So you can quickly create sort of documentation that I just save as a JPEG or PNG with my code. So if people say, what the hell does this thing do? I can show them the intent and original design. Or if you're working with other people, right? So you start to accumulate artifacts. Yeah, I don't like this to be big overhead, so I can draw faster than I can use Visio. I just draw it, I take a photo. I'm not really too caught up in making this really shiny, right? I want it to be fast and simple and get a good result more than look, corporate, right? But you could easily move it into Visio or something like that. But I would move it into Visio once you're done, because most likely you're going to redraw these a few times as you work out things you missed, right? So keep it really fast. Do it on whiteboards, something like that, right? What was that whiteboard thing you use, Gail?
Magic whiteboard?
Magic whiteboard. It is like a cling film that you can just stick on the wall, and it is whiteboard. So yes, I'm going to buy a roll of that when I get home. Never have enough whiteboards. Okay. Detect, interface. Yes, that's a good connection event, right? That's the one we're going to do. Okay. I don't know why I did that as a comment. Okay, again, you're not going to see all best practices with commandlet binding and stuff like that. I just want to focus on what we're doing. Okay, so we need to understand what our input's going to be. So what would we need for that? Sounds like a pretty good start. What do we call that? Interface name. And again, I would probably check the existing networking commandlets. Do they call it interface name, interface ID? I don't know. Make sure you are sort of consistent, right, with your naming. But let's just say it's interface name, right? And we could do all our mandatory true. If we wanted to limit it, maybe we didn't want Wi-Fi. Maybe we only wanted cabled interfaces to be subject to this. We could put a validate set and make sure it didn't have our wireless network in it, right? Do we need any other information? I think probably not.
For sake of completeness, interface type.
Yeah.
So it could exclude certain interfaces.
Yeah. Okay. Again, remember, if you want to change this later, it's going to be really hard. So you want to make sure this part is right. Okay? And then what are we going to output? State? I'd think probably a Boolean, right? See? I said, if you approve verbs, just shout out.
I was just thinking about and then I looked and
Oh, see? All right. Test interface connection event. Did something get connected or not, right? Okay. And so we're probably just going to output a Boolean, right? I think that's going to be, and then we'll trigger other things, right? This thing happened, now do this, right? Again, your functions want to do one thing. You don't want to detect that the event happened and then apply the settings in one function. That's bad design, right? This will just do one thing. Then we'll have another one here that will set the settings, right?
You could combine interface connected and disconnected, and then output value 1 or 2 if it's connected or disconnected.
You could, but then again, that starts to become bad. Sorry?
The conditions are saying the network interface in the state I think it's right now. In a route.
Sorry, you just mean we could, these are two things we want to detect. We could use test and do one thing if it is false and one thing if it is true? Yes. So these don't necessarily have to be functions. Sorry, I misunderstood. You're correct. If we do it this way, yeah?
I disagree with him because the disconnection event could happen on a network interface that we are not dealing with at the moment.
Yes, that's true.
So we have
But that, more in the functionality, did a connection event occur? Yes or no? Is it connected or not for that interface? We could use, and then probably something else calling that needs that logic of, is this an interface that I'm managing or not? But there are multiple ways you could implement it, right? I think in this case, we're not going to get to that level where we're actually using this. So you guys can argue about it over coffee when you do the next part, right? Okay. So now I still don't go to commandlets, right? Here I think about what does this function have to do, right? And I make sure I get my logic right. Then I can go implement with commandlets. And your implementation is the easiest part once you've got it defined. And actually doing this makes it really easy to farm implementation out to other people because you get back exactly what you asked for because you've been very clear about what you want, right? So what do we want to do? We want to check if interface name is connected to a network. If it is, return true, else return false. I know, does that sound about right? Yes, no?
You can change.
Sorry?
It's not relevant if it is true or connected. You need to ask if it has changed.
Okay, so you want to detect that the state has changed from the last time. So you're right, I think the way I've written this is wrong because we're detecting if a connection event has occurred, right? Not what the current state is, right? Because that's our trigger event, right? We want to trigger every time it's connected and every time it's disconnected. So probably we will check that event occurred, then we will check state, and then depending on state, we will reset or apply, right? I guess it depends if we call this test interface connection or test interface connection event. But since we are doing the actual trigger event, you're correct. See, we could have implemented the wrong thing. Check if interface name connection state changed, but if we're checking it's changed from when? If we want to do that, are we going to poll? Are we going to just get the last? I think that probably makes it more complicated. I wouldn't worry about an event. I'd probably just go straight to check the state. If it is connected, make sure it's configured properly. If it's disconnected, make sure it's reset. And I wouldn't really worry about anything in the middle. So this should probably be state. And this should be back like this, because it'll be much simpler. Otherwise, you need to do all kinds of time-based. Okay, yes, there was a connection event, but it's the same event I just detected before, and then you don't want to go in loops, right? Okay, so what do we need to work out? This is just, I mean, it's basically the code already, right? All we need to work out is how we do this test, right? How do we check that the interface name is connected? Now you can go and find your commandlets, right? I don't know, what are we going to search for?
get net adapter.
Sorry?
Get net adapter. Sorry, network adapter.
Sounds like a pretty good start.
It is net adapter.
Net adapter, yeah. Network.
Okay.
Net star adapter.
Okay, let's try it out. See what we need to feed into it, and make sure we have all of that on our. Okay, get net adapter. Okay. Now you can start to iterate through and say, okay, get net adapter does this. And now you're just in the process you already know. What does it return? What methods does it have? What properties does it have? How am I going to find this out, right? How do I filter? It looks like it uses a name parameter. Maybe we should change ours instead of interface name. Maybe it should just be name, right? And so we can iterate through. Sorry, I'm trying to work out the time. Yeah, we need to. Okay, now you're just back where you already know, right? You go find the commandlets that do what you think they would do. You implement this. You have all these sexy pester tests already you've done. You run them, right? And then you just work through your defined list, right? On the way, you might have some more complicated functions that you realize you need some helper functions. Maybe those helper functions need to go into another module, right? But I mean, I think anyone in this room could just go down that list and in a couple of hours probably have the solution he needs, right? And it's going to be in a way that's going to be modular. It's going to be reusable. It's going to be at least partially documented, right? And it's going to be, there's going to be a lot less looping trying to work out what went wrong. Just because you moved all the thinking up front instead of doing it ad hoc as you go. The talks I did in my DSC, I built 2 DSC resources, one with DSC for Linux and Python, which was completely unexpected. And I think all up, I spent less than a day doing all of that, right? And I used this method to design those solutions, which is why I have lots of squiggly pictures, right? So for me, this has helped a lot. I get things right much faster. I end up just by default with really modular code. And already I can see that by going through that exercise, instead of implementing commandlets now, I will use this to implement help and pester tests. My pester test will test this, my intent, right? That if I pass in this, I get out a Boolean that matches, right? All this bit in the middle, that's not what you want to test. That's implementation details. You should be able to change that without changing your tests. You check that if you put something in, you get out the right thing, right? So this allows you to know exactly what you need to mock, what you need to test, right? And it makes that transition much easier. So does anyone have any questions about, I do have a list of tools and reading materials. Just in general, like concepts around the DevOps movement and Agile concepts and thinking, the State of DevOps report is really good as an entry level or to supply to your management. So if you're trying to convince them for time to train on these type of tools or to do pester tests or anything, and you're trying to show that to a business leader that might not have the technical knowledge to understand it, that's a really great high level, and it maps directly from how far along the DevOps migration path an organization is and how much money they make, right? It's fantastic. It has really great stats. The Phoenix project, which I think most people would already know, The Goal by Eli Goldratt is actually the original version of the Phoenix project applied to manufacturing. So it was written in the 80s, I think, and the Phoenix project is an adaptation of that to IT. Right? So it goes in a little bit more about the original manufacturing processes that inspired all this kind of lean movement. I really like Kanban by David J. Anderson. This is a sort of agile methodology, like Scrum. He goes into how he uses that. The Visible Ops Handbook is really great as well. This has more implementation, like practical implementation steps, how to do things in your environment and organization. And continuous delivery. This is super big and kind of heavy. It's very focused on software engineers, but it's amazing. It has so much knowledge and details about all of the pitfalls and things along the way that you'll hit if you start trying to do this stuff in production at scale. I think I read most of it on a 14-hour flight on my Kindle. Clean Code by Robert C. Martin. That helped me a lot with my style practices and naming conventions, and another talk I do on writing elegant code, which is more about how to name functions, how to name variables, how to make your code readable and maintainable, more on the implementation, whereas this is on the intent. It is somewhere on YouTube. I can find it if people are interested or tweet it out. The Pragmatic Programmer, again, I really like this. It's quite short. They detail the pseudocode process, how to use that to document your intent before you start coding, and a lot of really practical tips to speed things up. And then once you start coming up against problems regularly, most of them are already solved. So how to structure something, how to pass data, how to structure different functions in different scenarios and modules. And these are called patterns. So this book goes into a lot of design patterns. If you have a problem like this, here is a model that we know is very efficient at solving this problem, right? And UML distilled, again, it's very thin. It talks about just the main sort of concepts in UML, how to use them practically. It doesn't get into the really deep scope stuff. It's all kind of sketch level. And I haven't finished this yet, but I'm now reading UML and patterns. So it's kind of linking these two topics of common scenarios and how to use UML to identify patterns so you can quickly just copy and reuse ideas that you already have. Does anyone else need a photo? No? Okay. So a couple things is, for me, I'm really working on focusing on intent, not on implementation. Don't get me wrong, if you never implement it, right, it's all just nonsense. You need to do that. But actually implementation is easy compared to getting intent right. If you've got commandlets and you've got help and things like that, you can easily find that a commandlet does X. What you need to work out is, do you need X? Or do you want Y? Right? Intent is very easy to get wrong. It's and it's very hard to troubleshoot, right? And it's very frustrating if you build something for someone else and they say, oh, this is really nice, but it doesn't do what I want, right? Can you start again? So it's the same thinking that all of these agile processes do. This work already exists, right? Admit it, do it up front, do it once well, and move on, right? Yeah, Gail?
Yeah, so it's when you say do it once, that means for each story, do it once. Don't do everything, do all the planning at the very beginning.
That's correct. So you should implement this use case, and then perhaps you have another use case that still uses things around your network adapter, but in a slightly different scenario. Maybe 10% of your customers have a slightly different requirement, right? You treat that differently. You implement this first, then you go back to the next one, right? You don't want to do it all up front. Yeah?
So, this model sounds good to use.
Okay,
For me.
great.
I
Whew.
also know how some of my colleagues are thinking, some
Yep.
of my friends, and they see there's a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Just go into, I just can code this, why you should do this.
Yeah.
What is your elevator pitch for this?
Other than slapping them? I agree. So the biggest thing is this myth that they are not already doing this work, right? So they see on my process, I said, here is what you're doing, and I added more steps. And they say, more steps means more work, right? It's a longer process. It's not. It's more steps, but it's a shorter process, and it's a process that is more predictable. So they are already doing all this design and intent work, but they're doing it as they go. So they get halfway and go, oh, I forgot something, and they go back here, and they change it all, and they go along here, and then they go, oh, I forgot something else, and they go back and they change this. and they're doing a lot of rework, hidden work, to readjust, like they forgot to put a parameter in, or they forgot to define another function, or split another function, and now this one has to call two things instead of one thing. So they keep changing their model, but just in their head. So that process they're following, they're doing lots and lots of loops as they keep changing things, because they didn't think about it in the beginning. They're just thinking about it as they go. So I find the best thing is actually to wait until this really happens to them and say, see when this happened to Bob on Tuesday? That's what I'm talking about. And then just let them do it wrong, but keep pointing and say, if you'd thought about this, you wouldn't have to do that. Especially if it really hurts, right? Wait till they're really in pain and then say, bye, I'm off to the pub, see you later, right? And here's some nice sketches you might want to look at. It's really hard, I think, until people can admit and see how much work they are doing that is unplanned, right? So it's sort of, they're comparing planned work that they're not doing to nothing. It's not. You have to compare your planned work to all the work you're doing that you didn't know you were going to do today. So also asking them things like, okay, how many things did you do today that you didn't know you were going to do? That percentage should not be very big, right, if you're doing things right. So I think the best thing is do it right for you, which is why I've tried to make it very light. So you can do it inside your team, right? You don't need your whole team to buy in for this to work for you. And if you're getting better results than them, they'll start to copy you pretty quick. So sometimes doing a big formal presentation, we want to adopt this, isn't the way. Maybe you just start sketching on a whiteboard and taking a photo and adding that to, the collaterals. Maybe you just start doing a few things and asking them to review your pseudocode. And they're like, why are you doing it like this? Well, because I want you to, you know what I mean? And then you can wear away. But yeah, I tried to make something that you could do standalone without having to get a whole organizational buy-in. Any other questions? Okay. Clearboard is the product I use for digitizing my drawings. I think that one you have to pay some money. I think it is maybe €100 or something. It's not too expensive. This one is free, ScanScribe. So this can actually modify, embed rich content, do a whole bunch of stuff to photos and images. So I take a photo, I process it with Clearboard, and then I load it into ScanScribe, and then you can do a whole bunch of really complex stuff if you want to. At the moment, I'm not using a lot of it, but you can embed hyperlinks, you can modify your sketches without going back to the whiteboard and trying to draw the whole thing again, right, if you see a mistake. You can tidy it up to make it look, for example, with a handwriting, you can replace with actual text. You can do a whole bunch of stuff in that. So it can be useful to help flesh out your sketches. And iterate. So don't, like Gail said, don't spend a week doing what's meant to be a fast process, right? Have a go. I mean, in 30 minutes, we kind of got to starting to code, right? And we just need to iterate over each of those. We will find some problems and mistakes, but there'll be a lot less than if we hadn't gone through this. Take each case on its own and get something done and then move on. So try and iterate over. Great, I think that's everything. Great, thanks everybody.